The sharp sound of a slap echoed through the room, leaving me stunned. My mother-in-law stood before me, her face twisted with anger, her hand still raised. The sting on my cheek burned like fire, but the deeper pain was the silence from my husband, Robert, as he stood in the corner, his gaze fixed firmly on the floor. "How dare you disrespect me?" and spat, her voice trembling with fury. The tension in the room was suffocating. I searched Robert's face for some sign of support, some acknowledgement that this had gone too far, but he remained quiet, his loyalty silently aligned with her. In that moment, I realized just how alone I truly was. My name is Ruth. I'm a 37-year-old interior designer living in San Francisco. Life wasn't always like this. I once had everything I could have dreamed of: supportive parents who believed in me, a thriving career, and a marriage that felt unshakable. But life has a way of changing, and not always for the better. When my parents passed away suddenly 3 years ago, they left me not just their love and memories, but also the responsibility of a thriving family business worth $75 million. It was their legacy, a symbol of their hard work and the life they'd built for me. Robert and I stepped in to manage it together, and for a while, it felt like we were building something meaningful. But Anne's attitude shifted the moment she learned about the inheritance. What started as warm congratulations quickly turned into something colder, sharper, something that would unravel everything I thought I could depend on. When my parents passed away unexpectedly 3 years ago, they left behind not only a void in my heart, but also a legacy I felt deeply responsible for: a thriving family business valued at $75 million. For them, this business wasn't just about money. It represented their years of dedication, sacrifice, and dreams for my future. It was a symbol of everything they had worked to build, a foundation they hoped I would preserve and nurture. Robert, my husband of 8 years, initially stood by my side. He assured me we would honor my parents' memory and safeguard their hard work. Together, we began running the business, and for a brief time, it felt like we were moving forward as a team. I envisioned this legacy as not just my parents' gift to me, but as the foundation for our own family's future, a secure base where we could one day build our dreams. But things took a turn when Anne, Robert's mother, learned about the inheritance. Anne had always maintained a cordial, if distant, relationship with me. However, news of the $75 million business seemed to awaken something in her. The warm congratulations I received at first soon gave way to subtle comments about sharing good fortune and family obligations. At first, I brushed them off, not wanting to create unnecessary tension. But Anne's remarks became more frequent, and her tone grew sharper. Slowly, she began to involve Robert, planting seeds of doubt and entitlement. Her narrative shifted from congratulating me to suggesting that my parents' legacy should benefit everyone in the family. The harmony I thought we shared began to fray as Anne's influence over Robert became more apparent. What once felt like a secure and united partnership was starting to crumble under the weight of manipulation. It was a crisp afternoon when Anne arrived unannounced, her usual polite demeanor replaced by something sharper, more assertive. I was in the middle of reviewing some designs for a client when she walked into the study, her gaze scanning the room as if she were inspecting it for flaws. Without so much as a greeting, she began, "Ruth, we need to talk." I set my papers aside, bracing myself. Conversations with Anne had grown increasingly tense since she learned about my inheritance. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "What's on your mind?" She sat down, her posture upright and businesslike. "I've been thinking about the family's future," she began, her tone almost rehearsed. "With the opportunities your parents' business has brought you, I think it's only fair that we, as a family, share in that prosperity." I frowned, unsure where she was going. "And the business is my parents' legacy. Robert and I are already working hard to honor that." Her smile tightened. "Yes, but there's more to think about. I've been considering investing in a property, a luxury home, something befitting our family status. A place where we can all gather and enjoy the success we've built together." I believe $12 million would cover it nicely. The audacity of her proposal left me speechless for a moment. I blinked, processing her words. And I said carefully, this business isn't just about money. It's a part of my parents' dream, their hard work. I can't simply give away such a significant portion for something so personal. Her expression hardened. So, you're saying no? You're not willing to help elevate your own family? This isn't just about you, Ruth. This is about all of us. I drew a steadying breath, trying to keep my voice calm. I've always considered you and Robert my family. But the business is not a disposable asset. It's meant to provide security, to honor my parents' legacy. I can't justify using it for luxury purchases. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped, sharp with disapproval. So, you're choosing money over family. That's what this is. Before I could answer, Robert walked into the room. I turned to him, hoping he'd take a stand. Robert, please, explain to your mother why this isn't possible. But he hesitated, his hands shoved into his pockets. Maybe we should at least talk about it, Ruth, he said quietly, glancing between us. It's not the whole business, just a portion. Maybe there's a compromise. A chill ran through me. A compromise? I repeated, incredulous. Robert, this isn't just about the money. It's about what this business represents. My parents worked their entire lives to build it, and you're asking me to dismantle it for what? A mansion? And seized on his hesitation. Exactly. Listen to your husband, Ruth. He understands that family comes first. I stood, unable to contain my frustration any longer. Family does come first, and which is why I'm protecting what my parents built. This business is their legacy. It's not a bank for personal indulgences. Her face flushed with anger. You wouldn't even have this business if it weren't for our support after your parents passed. And this is how you repay us? By hoarding everything for yourself. Robert, I said, turning to him again, are you seriously okay with this? You know how much this means to me. To us. He looked down at the floor, his voice barely above a whisper. I just don't want to be stuck in the middle, Ruth. The words hit me like a blow. Stuck in the middle? Robert, you're my husband. You're supposed to be on my side. And rose to her feet, her voice cold and sharp. Well, clearly you've made your choice. But don't think this is over, Ruth. If you're so determined to cut us out, don't be surprised when we do the same. With that, she stormed out, leaving Robert and me in a silence that felt heavier than any argument. I looked at him, searching for some sign of solidarity, but he only shook his head and left the room without another word. As I stood there, alone, I realized the cracks in my marriage were becoming too deep to ignore. Anne's demands weren't just about money. They were about control. And Robert's silence? That was its own kind of betrayal. Anne's behavior became unbearable in the weeks following our confrontation. Every phone call, every visit, and even her offhand comments were laced with passive-aggressive remarks about family values and selfishness. She made no attempt to hide her disdain, constantly framing me as the villain for refusing to give her what she wanted. Robert, as always, avoided taking sides. He claimed he didn't want to fan the flames, but his silence only emboldened and further. It was as if her resentment was filling the spaces between us, pushing us further apart. Then came the ambush. It was early evening when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Anne standing there with Robert's sister, Mary, and his cousin Thomas in tow. Their faces were stony, their presence clearly coordinated. My stomach churned. I knew this wasn't a casual visit. We need to talk, Anne announced, brushing past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. Mary and Thomas followed, their expressions cold and unreadable. I caught Robert's hesitant figure lingering outside before he finally stepped in, his gaze avoiding mine. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even as unease gripped me. And wasted no time. "Ruth, this behavior of yours is unacceptable," she began, her tone dripping with accusation. "You're sitting here, clinging to that business as if it's only yours. This is a family matter, and you're acting like you're above all of us." Mary chimed in, her voice sharp. "Do you even realize how selfish you look? Keeping everything for yourself while the rest of us struggle. It's disgusting." I took a deep breath, meeting their glares with calm resolve. This business isn't just about money, I said firmly. It's my parents' legacy, something they worked their entire lives to build. I'm responsible for preserving it, not dividing it up for personal gain. Anne scoffed, her voice rising. Preserving it? Don't make me laugh. You're hoarding it like it's your birthright, forgetting that family comes first. This isn't just about you, Ruth. I turned to Robert, hoping for some support. Robert, you know what this business means to me. Say something. But he only shifted uncomfortably, mumbling. Maybe we should listen to them, Ruth. Their family. The betrayal stung worse than I'd expected. So that's it? You're taking their side? I asked, my voice trembling. After everything, you still don't see how wrong this is? And exploded, her fury finally boiling over. You ungrateful brat, she shouted, stepping closer. You wouldn't have anything without us. Before I could react, her hand lashed out, striking me hard across the face. The sting was sharp, and the room seemed to freeze. Robert stood there, frozen in place, while Mary and Thomas exchanged uneasy glances. I steadied myself, touching my cheek as a surge of emotions threatened to overwhelm me. But I refused to back down. Straightening my shoulders, I glared at Anne. That's enough, I said, my voice low but firm. Get out of my house.
Now.
And sneered, but there was something in my tone that made her hesitate. With one final glare, she turned and stormed out, followed by Mary and Thomas. Robert lingered for a moment before trailing after them, leaving me standing alone in the suffocating silence. For the first time, I truly understood the battle I was facing, and how much I'd have to fight to protect what was mine. That evening, as I sat alone in the quiet aftermath of Anne's attack, a wave of clarity washed over me. I could no longer allow her or anyone else to dictate my life. My parents' business was their legacy, their life's work, and it was my responsibility to protect it. I had to take a stand, no matter how difficult it might be. I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Ryan, the lawyer my parents had trusted for years. His voice was calm and steady as I recounted the events, from Anne's escalating behavior to the slap that had left a physical and emotional mark. Ruth, he said after I finished, this is unacceptable. We need to act immediately to protect you and your rights. My recommendation is to file for restraining order against and anyone else involved in this harassment. It will legally prevent them from approaching you or interfering with your property. Relief mingled with determination.
Thank you, I said.
Tell me what you need, and I'll get started right away. For the next several hours, I meticulously documented everything. I wrote down the timeline of events, the confrontation that led to the slap, and Robert's passive silence throughout. I gathered evidence, texts, emails, and any communication that highlighted Anne's manipulative attempts to claim a share of the business. By the time I was finished, I felt more prepared, but the weight of the situation still pressed on my shoulders. Over the next few days, Mr. Ryan worked swiftly. The restraining order was filed, and I felt a small sense of security knowing that Mary and Thomas would face legal consequences if they attempted to approach me or the business again. It was a step forward, but the emotional toll lingered. Robert, meanwhile, became more distant than ever. He avoided discussions about his family, choosing instead to spend most of his time at Anne's house. When he was home, the silence between us was deafening. He would sit in the living room, scrolling through his phone or staring blankly at the television, offering no words of support or apology. One evening, I decided to confront him. Robert, I began, breaking the silence, do you even realize what your family has put me through? And attacked me in our own home. And you just stood there. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what you want me to say, Ruth. They're my family. I can't just cut them off. And I'm your wife. I snapped, my voice breaking with frustration. When are you going to start standing up for me instead of letting them walk all over us? His eyes met mine, but there was no fight in them, just exhaustion. I'm trying to keep the peace, he said quietly. But peace was no longer an option, not with everything at stake. As he turned away from me once again, I realized the distance between us wasn't just physical. It was a chasm I wasn't sure we could bridge. It started as an ordinary afternoon. I was in the study, organizing documents for the family business, when I heard the rumble of trucks outside. Peering through the window, I froze. A moving truck was parked at the driveway, and stepping out of her car, looking as self-assured as ever, was Anne. She wasn't alone. Mary and Thomas were with her, along with a team of movers ready to unload. My stomach tightened as anger and disbelief surged through me. They were here to take over. I walked to the front door and opened it just as Anne reached the steps. She didn't wait for an invitation. "Ruth," she began with an air of mock politeness, "we're here to set things right. It's time this house and everything in it became part of the family's future. These movers will help expedite the process." I crossed my arms, planting myself firmly in the doorway. "This is my property, and you have no right to be here." Anne's smile didn't waver. "No right? Ruth, don't be so dramatic. This is family business, and you're acting like a tyrant. If you won't willingly share, we'll take matters into our own hands." Mary stepped forward, her tone sharp. "You've made this harder than it needed to be. Just step aside, Ruth. It's for everyone's benefit." My heart pounded, but I refused to let them intimidate me. "If you don't leave right now, I'll make sure you regret it," I warned. Anne's face darkened. "Oh, and how will you manage that?" Without a word, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "This is Ruth Blake," I said, my voice steady. "I have individuals trespassing on my property in violation of a court-ordered restraining order. They're attempting to take possession of my home. I need police assistance immediately." Anne's confident demeanor faltered slightly, but she crossed her arms defiantly. "You're making a mistake," she snapped. "This is a family matter. The police have no place here." Minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the air. The movers hesitated, looking to and for direction as two police cars pulled up. Officers stepped out, their expressions serious as they approached the group. I met one of the officers and handed him the restraining order. "These individuals are violating this court order by being here," I explained. "They're attempting to take possession of my property without any legal right." The officer nodded and turned to Anne. "Ma'am, you are trespassing on private property and violating a legal restraining order. You and your group must leave immediately, or you will face legal consequences." Anne's composure crumbled. "This is ridiculous," she protested. "She's blowing everything out of proportion." The officer didn't budge. "If you refuse to comply, you'll be arrested," reluctantly, and motioned for her entourage to back off, but not without one final glare at me. "This isn't over, Ruth," she hissed. "You'll regret this." I stood firm, watching as the officers escorted them off the property. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control return. They may have tried to take what was mine, but I was ready to fight for everything my parents left me. The evening Robert returned, I could sense the weight of his thoughts before he even spoke. He stood hesitantly in the doorway of the living room, his shoulders slumped and his face etched with conflict. For a moment, neither of us said a word, the silence between us heavy with unspoken tension. Finally, he sighed and sat across from me. "Ruth," he began softly, "this whole situation has spiraled out of control. My family feels hurt and betrayed. Can't we find a way to resolve this without dragging lawyers and restraining orders into it?" His words, though measured, felt like a dagger. "Robert," I replied, my voice calm but firm, "your family isn't just making requests. They're trying to take over everything my parents worked their entire lives to build. And showed up with movers, for God's sake. How can you not see how wrong this is?" He looked away, fidgeting with his hands. "I just don't want to lose my family," he muttered. "This constant fighting, it's not what I wanted." "And what about me, Robert?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of hurt and anger. "I was supposed to be your family too. But every time they crossed a line, you stood there and did nothing. When Anne slapped me, when she brought movers to our house, you didn't defend me. Not once." He flinched, but he didn't argue. "I just wanted to keep the peace," he said weakly. I shook my head, the betrayal cutting deeper with each word. Keeping the peace? By letting them bully me? By staying silent when they violated every boundary? Robert, your silence hurt more than anything they did. I can't keep living like this. His eyes finally met mine, filled with a sorrow I could no longer care about. What are you saying? He asked, though I could tell he already knew the answer. I'm saying I can't do this anymore, I said quietly. I can't be in a marriage where I'm constantly fighting alone. You've chosen them over me every time. It's clear where your loyalty lies. Robert opened his mouth as if to protest, but then closed it, nodding slightly. I guess I can't undo what's already happened, he murmured. No, I replied, my voice steady. You can't. And I can't keep sacrificing my peace for this. It's time for you to leave. Robert didn't argue. He gathered his things and left without another word, leaving behind the silence I had come to know so well. This time, though, the silence felt freeing. In the days that followed Robert's departure, I was left alone in the mansion. No, my mansion, with the echoes of what had been. But rather than let the weight of the past overwhelm me, I decided to rebuild, both the house and myself. This place, once a symbol of my parents' legacy, would now also represent my journey, my resilience, and my independence. I hired contractors to make changes that reflected not just practicality, but personality. Walls that once seemed imposing were painted in bright, welcoming tones. I redesigned spaces to reflect my tastes, strong yet elegant. The dining room became a vibrant, open space for hosting friends, and the office transformed into a creative sanctuary for my design work. Each change was deliberate, a step forward, a reclamation of my life. In restoring the mansion, I felt a growing sense of empowerment. The business my parents built now thrived under my careful management, and I poured myself into its growth, ensuring it honored their dreams. I reconnected with old friends, reaching out to the people who had always been there for me, but whom I drifted from during the chaos. Slowly, I began to rebuild not just a home, but a life that was entirely mine. I even started volunteering at a local design school, mentoring students who reminded me of my younger self. Helping others find their passion was healing, a reminder of my purpose beyond the pain I had endured. One evening, I stood on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The view was breathtaking, the kind my parents had always cherished. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. This mansion was no longer just a reminder of what I had lost. It had become a testament to my courage and the strength it took to reclaim my life. Every room, every corner, now carried a story of resilience, a reflection of who I had become. As I watched the fading light, I realized that my journey was far from over. But for the first time, I felt ready to embrace the future, knowing I had the strength to shape it on my own terms. My parents had given me this gift not just to preserve their dreams, but to build my own. Thank you for joining me on this journey of resilience and self-discovery. If Ruth's story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more tales of courage, transformation, and unexpected twists. See you in the next story.